Well, each time the IPCC releases one of these reports, the news becomes clearer and the news becomes worse. I personally live in a world that is optimistic, so I have a strong belief that we can fix these problems, and for all these problems that the planet has today, there is technology out there that can address it if we roll it out at sufficient scale, and that's the world I'm in, is how do we actually roll out this scale so that we fix these problems as urgently as we can. And we do need to do it incredibly quickly, as much as we can over the next decade, so that we can avert really bad outcomes. And here we are in Australia today with catastrophic flooding all over the East Coast, absolutely entangled with what the IPCC report is talking about. And so we have to fix it, and we can all feel this now as a society. I think a few years ago we may have looked at our situation and thought, well, that's all very well that there's technology, but it's very difficult, if not impossible, to re-engineer a whole planet so that this problem is solved. But we've just done it with COVID. We know we can do it as a planet. We know we can corral the population of Earth to do something, and we just need to do it again. We need to keep going. Main Sequence Ventures is a venture capital firm. We were founded by Australia's National Science Agency, which is called the CSIRO. And CSIRO is a 100-year-old organisation that was established to help research have a massive impact in industry. So it's translational research. The fund itself is intended to help early stage research become a globally significant company as fast as possible. And we have a particular attention to the problems that the planet has. So the IPCC report and problems of climate change are right at the center of the work that we're doing inside the fund. And our job is to turn that research into companies, and those companies into whole new industries, which will, first of all, last for decades to come and help the country, but ultimately solve enduring problems for the planet. So the way we think about our work is through a series of challenges, as we call them. So what are the challenges that Earth has? And then we go hunting for the companies that answer that call and potentially solve those challenges. So our challenges are, we have one called Feed 10 billion people, which reflects on the reality that there'll be 10 billion people in the next couple of decades. That means we're going to need literally twice as much food to feed the 10 billion people. And already today, we've run out of planet to actually make food in the way we make food today. So we need to figure out new ways of making food. We need to rethink what food is and how it's produced. And ultimately, we need to make it in a much more sustainable way. So the way we say it in the fund is we need to use half the planet to make twice as much food. We have another sustainability-driven challenge area that we call decarbonisation. So that's just about not only how do we go climate neutral in terms of the impact we have on the planet, but how do we actually unwind some of the damage that we've done? So how do we start putting carbon back into the sea and back into the soil? And so that's technologies in agriculture, technology in energy production, technologies in transport. We have an area called Bridge the Gap to Space, which is looking at the emerging new space industry. Not only is that a global new industry, but it is a industry that Australia can have an advantage in. Many people don't know that Australia is NASA's Southern Hemisphere operation, and CSIRO runs a lot of that. So when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and said that's one small step for mankind, that was talking to a CSIRO telescope in Parkes, and we have a very rich heritage of space technology here in Australia. Now, the interesting thing about space is not so much about going to Mars. It's about making Earth better, because you can make Earth better if you can look at it from another perspective. If you look at Earth from space, you can see water traveling under the Earth. You can see where the carbon is in the soil. You can start measuring things so that farmers can grow their crops better. You can track supply chains as they move around the Earth. And so we can make the Earth better in that sense by observing it differently, but also we can, if you're making, for example, food that people can eat on Mars, that's actually a super helpful way of looking again at how we make food here on Earth. It gives you an extreme context to kind of think about things. So space is a very important area for us. We have a whole challenge area around industrial productivity. And sometimes this is controversial because people think this is about automation and removing jobs. But actually in the history of humankind, when there's been a leap in automation, it has caused more jobs for humans. And we look at where we are today, we're already at capacity. In Australia, we're at almost full employment. And we still need to make more of everything. We need more stuff, more of everything that's around us. And so the way we will prosper as a country and as a planet is by figuring out how we level up the productivity again. So again, that's automation, that's robots, that's satellites again. That's all kinds of things that make humans more powerful, which relates us to the next challenge area, which is all around the next intelligence leap. So how do we make humans more powerful in terms of our minds as well as our kind of strength, if you like, from the industrial productivity side? So what happens when you combine a human with artificial intelligence? What happens to healthcare? What happens to education? What happens to safety in industry? So that's what that theme's all about. We have another area which is called humanity scale healthcare. And that's about how do more humans get better healthcare at a lower cost, and so that's how is healthcare delivered? How do we treat people at home rather than in a hospital? How do we use data to actually make sure people are on the right kind of medicine? And so there's some of our challenge areas that we work on. That's a day at the office at Main Sequence. Well, there are many, and what I often say to young people is, rather than thinking about looking for a job, look for a problem, look around you, look at the things which feel impossible to solve and wonder if you can solve them. And when you go looking around the universities of Australia, you see people solving these problems, and it's quite a awesome moment when you have that realization. Some of these things feel out of reach as mere mortals, but then every day in the labs we see people solving these problems, and so if you begin with a problem, if that's your frame of reference and you look around the world, you'll never be out of work if you're interested in solving those problems. And then you go to universities and you see people not only doing the science and building communities and concentration around actually solving those problems, but you see people starting companies now. And that's really interesting. Where 10 years ago, the universities of Australia may have been places where you sort of singularly go and learn. You go into the classroom or the lecture theatre, or you go into the lab and you do a postdoc. Now all that is happening, and people are starting companies out of that. And the benefit there is, instead of containing your work to academic papers and speaking to your peers in the scientific community, you're actually taking it to the next level. You're rolling it out into the world and solving the problem at scale. I think it's such a great example of innovation that is a solution, a known solution to a catastrophic problem of climate change. as you say, the effects of methane emissions from cows mostly and sheep to some extent is a dramatic impact on the planet. I mean, emissions wise, it's comparable to cars on the road and things like that. And people don't think of animals sort of causing that problem, but what's actually happening is when cows and sheep digest grass, they need to belch it up a few times and swallow it again. And that belching is a big burp of methane, which goes up into the atmosphere, and we farm millions and millions of sheep and cows for clothes and for food. But the wonderful thing is, you can fix it by feeding them something different. Feed them something natural, feed them something that grows in the ocean, which is a special kind of seaweed called Asparagopsis. And seaweed has a number of benefits. First of all, when you grow seaweed feeds off carbon dioxide and light, and so it's sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere back into the sea, and sequestering it at a massive rate. So there's a benefit there. And then when you're feeding it to the cows, it's helping them to digest the grass the first time, which means they don't need to burp it up so much. It also means they grow better, they produce more wool in the case of sheep. And so everybody wins. Farmers get more product, and the planet gets less methane. And it's almost entirely eradicated with this technology, so it's an enormous impact. And the job now is for every sheep and every cow to be eating it in their diet and solving the problem. Well, I think one of the areas we're very interested in general is the sort of plastic problem that we have on Earth today. And I think we shouldn't forget that plastic was invented for a good reason. Before plastic, we were using things like ivory when we needed a material that was very, very hard for things like piano keys and buttons and so forth. And so we invented, different kinds of plastic that we use today. And the problem is, we've just made so much of it. On Earth today, there's 9 billion tons of plastic, almost all of it in landfill, almost none of it recycled, lasting for tens of thousands of years. And now we've got more humans coming to the Earth, and we're going to have even more plastic. So we need to solve that problem. And Ulu's one of the companies that's solving that problem. And what they've done is they've found a new way of making plastic. First of all, it's a bioplastic, which means it's biodegradable. It's not going to be in landfill for tens of thousands of years. But perhaps more interestingly, the way it's produced is not only sustainable, it's beneficial to climate change, because their raw material is actually seaweed. As I mentioned before, seaweed pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. So for every 1 unit of Ulu produced, 5 equivalent weights of that unit will be sequestered into the sea as carbon. That is spectacular in its own right. Even if we weren't using the product, that's already a very valuable solution to the Earth. But then they're using that instead of fossil fuel to make plastic. So that's one less reason to pull oil out of the ground and to perpetuate fossil fuels. We can actually make it with this incredibly climate-friendly seaweed. And so, for fashion companies, it's going to mean that, in fact, it's a very good example of what I was mentioning before, where industry in general has, let's say, spent the climate in years gone by. If fashion starts using Ulu, it'll be paying back that debt, and it'll be putting it back into the Earth. Yeah, I'm very optimistic about the future. I look around Australia during COVID, and it was horrible for all of us, but look at what we did as a country and how we rose to the challenge and how we did what we needed to do. Everything from finding the money to doing the work as a citizen, to kind of getting that happening. I'm very lucky in my work in that when I encounter a problem, I'm not encountering it in a newspaper where it's all bad news and I have no agency to solve the problem. I'm encountering it in a way where I can go and look for people who are working on it, and I always find somebody. That's the thing. It's not that it happens sometimes. I always find them. So I have to be optimistic, and I guess it's an important superpower in this work, because the things that we're building are hard. They do need lots of money. They do need a lot of shoulders to the job, and so you have to have a strength to kind of push that forward. But it has to be fueled by optimism. Otherwise, we'll never get there.